At long last, we are back by popular demand. Welcome back to Railways of the Porterverse. We will be covering the Porterverse lore of the narrow gauge railways. The two railways of focus are the Skarloey-Crovan's Gate Railway and the Mid-Sodor Railway. As their histories are pretty entangled, they'll be both in this one video. So we'll be bouncing around a lot between these two railways. But I'll try my best to keep the timeline consistent, linear, and easy to understand. Disclaimer as always, all information in this video is purely headcanon. Nothing in this video is official fact. If you notice anything that differs from any official canon, it's all intentional and it's just a bit of fun in the end. It's Thomas Tank Engine, it isn't that serious. Now then, we have a lot to go through. So sit back, relax some good food and drink, and enjoy the show. Our stories begin in 1865. A workshop in Whitehaven finished his work on two duplicate engines. They both resembled their previous engines, Tallyglin and Dolgok. However, these new engines weren't 100% identical, as they were slightly tweaked a bit to fit the needs of a new railway on the island of Sodor. Their names were taken from the two towns the new railway went to, Skarloey and Reneus. Skarloey and Reneus will become numbers 1 and 2 respectively of the newly formed Skarloey-Crovan's Gate Railway. In the early years, Skarloey and Reneus wore a pinkish livery with white wheels and lining. They did not get along well at first, but they did eventually warm up to each other, and would both be fitted with cabs shortly after arrival. The Skarloey Railway's main export was slate. The slate quarry was the largest on Sodor at the time, and they made absolute bank on this. Slate was the game of the Skarloey Railway, and for about 10 years it was only an industrial railway that served the slate quarry. In the 1870s, custom-designed coaches were built for the line, and passenger services promptly began. Fast forward a bit to the 1880s, when a new narrow gauge railway would open in the heart of Sodor and eventually connect to the Skarloey Railway. Several engines would arrive to run it, as it was much larger than the Skarloey Railway. These engines included Duke, Stanford, more referred to as Ford, Smudger, and a few others. The new railway was called the Mid-Sodor Railway. The railways will have connecting lines at Skarloey for long-distance sleeper trains, but rarely would other trains run the whole length of the two railways at this time. Fast forward to 1904, when a certain Falcon arrives on the Mid-Sodor Railway. He goes through a lot of little comeuppances, if you will, including the Bulldog incident, where he dangles off the edge of a cliff and nearly falls off. But Duke holds firm like a bulldog and pulls him back to safety, and Falcon will continue service after this. 1910 saw the arrival of Freddy. Fast forward again to 1914, when the First World War began. The Skarloey Railway's slate mine began to boom, and it continued through 1918. However, by 1919, the slate demand slumped, but the mine stayed open. 1920 saw the arrival of Peter Sam on the Mid-Sodor. Jumping back to the Skarloey Railway, in 1922, a new livery was introduced. This new livery was more of a red color and had brass fittings, blue lining, black wheels, and red side rods. This would become the official livery of the railway, and most of its engines still wear it in present day. Very few major events occurred during the 1930s. Aside from the Great Depression affecting the railways, nothing much really happened. Towards the end of the decade, World War II will begin, and the conflict will kick the absolute living shit out of the narrow gauge railways on Sodor. All engines on the railways were painted into wartime black, and the mines on the Mid-Sodor Railway were stripped bare, leaving their industries effectively dead. In 1940, during the Battle of Britain, Sodor was bombed by Nazi Germany, and the most affected areas included large parts of the Mid-Sodor Railway. Sadly, several engines were killed in this bombing, including Stanford and Smudger. In 1941, the MSR would officially close permanently after all of this. and the remaining engines will be sold to various owners. Duke will be kept in a shed after no one bought him, while the other engines went elsewhere. Peter, Sam, and Falcon in particular were donated to the Skarloey Railway, after some strings were pulled between the two railways' owners, who were good friends at the time. Speaking of which, also around the early 1940s, the Skarloey Railway was going through it as well. Its only two engines were showing their age, and Skarloey became fully inoperable by 1941, and Rheneas was left to run the whole railway on his own for the next few months. That is, until Peter, Sam, and Falcon arrived. Shortly after their arrivals, Rheneas will be taken out of service as well. Eventually, Skarloey and Rheneas will be shipped down the Crovan's Gate Locomotive Works for overhauls in 1946. Now, the only two narrow gauge railways in service at this time were Peter, Sam, and Falcon. And for the next 6 years or so, things would stay this way. Eventually, Falcon would break down and be taken out of service, leaving Peter, Sam to run everything on his own, oftentimes combining passenger and goods trains at once. He nearly totals himself at one point on one of these trains, but a freshly overhauled Skarloey comes to his rescue one fateful day in 1952. They will be the engines present in the BBC documentary being filmed at this time. Rusty would also make a brief cameo in it as well. Speaking of which, Rusty would arrive to a warm welcome. Even Falcon liked them. Rusty is just that chill of a diesel. In 1954, Rheneas will make his grand return to the railway. The full fleet was back together at last, and would only continue to grow over time. Eventually, the railway's sixth engine would arrive after being purchased from a mainland factory. His name was Duncan. Duncan was a very rough engine to be around. He often rocked and rolled as he pulled trains. It even derailed often. He gained sense over time, of course. In present day, he is more like the Squidward of the railway. In 1960, Peter Sam suffered a horrific accident. A rake of slate trucks broke away from the slate incline and hit him right in the face. Peter Sam was badly damaged in the accident and needed a new funnel replaced. He also gained a massive scar on his face. But he had to remain in service due to tightening finances, and had to use a drain pipe as his funnel for a short stint. Eventually, he will receive buffers and a new Giesel ejector funnel, and he will keep this new funnel as it greatly improved his performance. And also around this time, all of the newer arrivals, engines 3 through 6, would officially receive the Skarloey Railway Red. The mid-1960s saw a great expansion of the Skarloey Railway. Most of the old Mid-Sodor line was bought by the railway, and all stations were to be restored. Several new engines would also arrive around this time, many of which to help restore and run the new half of the line. This included Mighty Mac, Luke, Proteus, Freddy, and others. Freddy and Proteus were tracked down by a group of train enthusiasts who discovered they were former Mid-Sodor engines, and this group would later take on the quest to find Duke. Speaking of which, Duke's disposition was a bit of a mystery at this time, but some historians discovered that he was never sold and was actually left at somewhere on the Mid-Sodor Railway. It was only a matter of traveling the old abandoned lines to find him. And so, in 1969, a search party consisting of Wilbert Audrey, Teddy Boston, and a few others set out with Rusty along the old lines. The quest for Duke was on. After about a week or so of searching, they almost gave up. That is, until Teddy Boston quite literally fell through the roof onto Duke. Duke was somehow still alive. Turns out he was actually sedated and was basically in a coma for most of the time in the shed. To Duke, it felt like closing his eyes, like blinking and opening back up. All of a sudden, 20 years went by. And it was Teddy Boston's grand entrance that awoke him from his slumber. Duke was dug out of the shed and brought to Crovan's Gate Locomotive Works, where restoration began. Duke now works with Millie, Sinclair, and Little Barford in present day, as those are the other narrow gauge engines on the UCR. He does get to visit the Skarloey Railway on occasion, and whenever he is on the Skarloey Railway, he always catches up with his Mid-Sodor Railway buddies. In 1985, a funicular railway was constructed. This new funicular railway has two carriages, Owen and Colin. Both go up and down from the base of Skarloey Lake up to the top of Skarloey Station daily, and are proven to be quite popular with enthusiasts. Also around this time, Duncan decides to change out his red livery in favor of a yellow one, and he will keep this livery in present day. Fast forward a bit to the 1990s, and a new engine was built named Ivo Hugh. Unlike the Railway series, he is not directly based on Tom Rolt, but the circumstances are similar. The Skarloey Railway had some old engine parts and decided to use them to build a new engine. Ivo Hugh in this universe is an 060T that loosely resembles Tom Rolt. Ivo Hugh got his name from the Skarloey Railway's chief mechanical engineer of 45 years. Mr. Hugh attended the unveiling ceremony and retired with honor. So that pretty much sums up everything. We have now fully covered the narrow gauge railways in the Porterverse. Their histories were, for the most part, very similar to their official counterparts. I currently find a lot of things to change, really. The Railway series is just that good. It actually feels pretty nice getting back into this series after such a long hiatus. Unfortunately, there will end up being another long hiatus to the next episode, as the next episode will be covering the Big City Railroad, and it'll more than likely be the last of that series. Turns out trying to get all the lore of like almost 200 years is pretty difficult to say the least. But I am still trying to work on that video, so expect it at some point in 2025, hopefully. That's all the updates and stuff I gotta share, so let's get into the outro. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Railways of the Porterverse, and I shall see you all same time next week.